is episode 25, and I think this week a unique story around using bread in beer and how you can really do some really creative and amazing storytelling and engage the consumers around bread.
Yeah, our silver anniversary, kind of, in a way. So I
Yes.
guess 25. If I try to think of something symbolic or about the number 25, it's a pretty random number. But yeah, we're just chugging along. So yeah, and the story that we'll share, I think there's a few big learnings from that, which we'll save maybe till when we get into that a little deeper. But yeah, it's a great story nonetheless, and we'll cover that a bit later.
And before we get into that, Brent, I think the market update, I was here listening to a farmer speak this week, and I think quite a sobering statistic in the UK that more than half of the farmers earn less than the median household wage in the UK. So that's less than around £32,000 a year. So I think being a farmer these days is a pretty tough gig.
Yeah, it's hard work. Been that way for a while. I think it's actually worse now. If you think ahead to, as we've talked about, the crop that's now just in the ground, and maybe more importantly, next year's crop. If we don't see some relief on things like fuel prices and fertilizer prices, then either prices have to go up significantly to offset those input costs, or those farmer margins are going to shrink even further. So it's not setting up to be a great place. The market update at this time usually is centered on the weather. So we look at the weather forecast. It looks pretty good for barley. I'd say most of Europe's barley is now planted, and we're all watching the weather forecast as we've talked about before. But I would say generally pretty positive. And the other big market comment, I guess, would be still around the disruptions that we
Yeah.
see. Maybe there's a peace deal in Iran, maybe not. Today, in the last week of May, we're seeing some potential for a peace deal, but I've almost been desensitized to it,
Yeah.
Danielle. I don't until I see something officially signed. I guess I'm a little bit pessimistic in that regard.
Yep. And I think that's kind of what some of the farmers here were saying, is that they're almost planting on the hope that there'll be some sort of deal slash government infrastructure support for the year ahead, but actually just planting, not knowing what's coming.
As Casper Madsen said in a previous episode, you can't put hope on the bottom line, so you
No,
can't put hope into your margins.
no.
Or as we say, hope's not a strategy. So it's, but just as you described it, it's a bit concerning that we're at a point where farmers are really on the edge in that sense, right? On making a small profit is entirely dependent on whether it rains or not, because if the yield's not there, the prices aren't sufficient enough to offset. So yeah, difficult situation for sure.
Yeah. And anything else, Brent, that you're seeing other than being the weatherman and the
Yeah, well, I guess we talked a little bit about the first quarter results from the big brewers, which mildly positive because we did see some mild beer volume growth. And maybe the other thing, Danielle, we hadn't talked about it a lot, but as I got going through that a little deeper, this whole big brewer move to beyond beer, the numbers in the first quarter, it may change, but the numbers in the first quarter of 2026 showed quite some weakness in beyond beer. So that was interesting, number one. Maybe it tells us that maybe that beyond beer might be a bit of a fad, or maybe it will run through its own cycle. I hope the optimist in me would say maybe that means we could see people come back to beer, which would be a great result. But I just thought it was interesting that beyond beer was not performing like it did last year, or maybe all the focus that's been put on it. Maybe that'll reestablish more focus on beer, and non-alc's doing well. Premium beer is still doing well. Just thought it was interesting that the beyond
yeah, that
beer
is.
category was struggling a bit.
And as we move around to that, I think is a good sort of lead into Crumbs. So I think that's someone who's doing something different, but still very firmly in the beer space.
Yeah, I guess we'll listen to it, and we'll come back and have a few comments after. Okay. Now, for this version of the Pursuing the Perfect Pint, we're taking a small journey over to the UK, and Morgan from Crumbs Brewery has agreed to tell us a bit of his story. So I guess, first of all, Morgan, thanks for taking some time to connect with us and have a discussion. A really unique story that we're going to get into. But first of all, it's a thank you for being part of it. So appreciate
No
that.
problem. Really good to meet you. And yeah, always happy to chat about all things beer, definitely.
Yeah. So maybe you could just talk a little bit around how this all became. So Crumbs Brewery, how did it get started? What's your role? You probably have more than one hat on, but what are the hats that you're wearing?
Yeah, my wife and I created Crumbs Brewing Getting on for 10 years ago now, we first sort of started developing recipes and developing the idea. I have a bit of a history in the booze industry. I used to work for companies like Allied Domecq, and I did a bit of work with SAB Miller for a long time, more in the marketing and the sort of the innovation side. So was always really passionate and interested in beer specifically, and then also was really interested in new ideas in beer. And yeah, we kind of created the idea of Crumbs, which in a sort of in a nutshell, we take bread that's either surplus or would otherwise be wasted, and we use that to brew our beer. I'd love to say I came up with the idea, but part of the inspiration for the idea was from the guys. There's a brewery in Belgium, the Brussels Beer Project, that I think have a long history of experimenting with new techniques, and actually in this case rediscovering old techniques, because there's a lot of history of brewing with bread that goes right back to sort of pre-Egyptian times. So we'd heard of what they were doing and kind of thought, that sounds like an interesting idea. So we started out very locally. We teamed up with our local baker, so a little baker that's just down the road. We're based down in Surrey, which is sort of near Gatwick in the UK. Teamed up with the local baker, came across the worrying stat that 44% of bread in the UK never gets eaten. So it's one of the most shocking offenders in terms of food waste. And spoke to the baker, and yeah, sure enough, he struggled a lot with surplus and with waste. He's got a couple of shops, and took the idea and it kind of grew from there, really.
Yeah. Staggering number, as you said, 44% of the bread does not get consumed. That's I would never have thought the number was up.
No, I think it's up there with, I think potatoes are the number one. I can't remember the number on potatoes, but it's number two, I think, in the hit list. And it's not just I think the thing that frustrates me as well is breads, if you've ever met a baker before, they're an interesting crowd. They, they're massively passionate about what they do. They work all night baking in the bakery, work really, really disgusting hours, but are really kind of skilled artisans. So it's such a shame that a product that has had that much effort put into it gets wasted. But then I think on top of that, there's also just the environmental side of things in terms of so much of our planet's kind of carbon footprint and the carbon footprint of production and food production goes into making food that actually all the effort that's gone into to making that wheat that goes into a slice of bread, just like the energy that goes into making malt and barley, is also getting wasted. So if you're replacing a virgin product with a product that has already had one life and you're repurposing it, that's a really positive bonus as well.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think we'll come back around to that because that artesian piece is showing up in the brands. But I guess you talked about the 10-year history. I guess I think maybe you do the same, Morgan. My life is around what happened before pandemic and what happened after pandemic. Your 10-year cycle puts you firmly right in the middle of that. So I guess from a business perspective, how was that, going through the pandemic, coming out of it, and that journey over those 10 years has been a pretty wild one, I would think, but maybe
yeah, like I see, it is strange. In some ways, the pandemic kind of shook us out of so like I said, we started very locally, and to be honest, the brand for the first sort of whatever it was, 3-4 years up to first lockdowns or so, we kind of treated it as a bit of a side hustle, and like I say, worked very locally. We followed the farmer around to farmers markets, the baker around to farmers markets, and sold our beer there and distributed into local pubs and local delis and things. And then obviously, yeah, the big shock of kind of lockdown and what the impact that had on your business. But interestingly, it sort of the positive that it gave us was because, a fair amount of our business at the time and still is sort of online via our website. You can kind of buy our beers. And actually, because everyone was locked down at home and had nothing else to do that maybe enjoy a few beers, you sort of saw the upside as to what the potential was for the brand. And ironically, even though the world was locked down, probably our brand got a far bigger reach during that period because we were selling a lot more online and doing
people experimenting at home because they had nothing else to do.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah. And it was sort of pretty post lockdown, even though the environment became far more challenging. It actually we changed our mindset to say, look, let's think about how we scale this brand at a national level, and that's really then when we started talking to the supermarkets and looking at bigger sort of restaurant chains and pub chains, etc. So in an ironic way, it kind of gave us confidence, or gave us more confidence to think about the brand nationally. But at the same time, as I'm sure we all appreciated, the climate and the cost structures and stuff not quite as favorable as they were back then. So.
Yeah. I guess it helped you get established with the off premise, or if I say the packaged goods in retail. And since we're now kind of getting back to normal, where are you, like on premise? Do you have a tasting room, or what's your?
Yeah, actually, well, we had a small tasting room in Reigate that at the moment actually is just going through some refurbishment. But we teamed up again with a local gin maker and sort of jointly opened up a tasting room together, which was really good. Again, so much of our business is around sort of focused around partnerships. That's sort of how we like to work. But yeah, I think the thing we've done since, I mean, I think our off trade has continued to build. So in the UK we now work with Ocado, so we're available on Ocado. We're available across a lot of the co-op stores in the UK, and literally as of about sort of 3 months ago, we're now having our first sort of expansion abroad. So we're working with a distributor to get into sort of Sweden first, and I think some of the first shipments have gone sort of in the last 2 weeks or so to there. So again, it's sort of broadening our horizons, and yeah, we're still a small brand, but it's exciting to see where you can take it. Kind of.
Yeah, on the partnership with the gin producer, in terms of traffic and people coming in, is that still picking up? Like, where are consumers in terms of their willingness and ability to get out and come and
Yeah,
visit?
I think it's definitely challenging, and that's part of the reason we're sort of slightly revamping our offer a bit. But actually, I think the thing that the big takeout I took out of it is I don't think it's true that people are going out less, and in the current climate, sort of people's disposable income is definitely more constrained. But I don't necessarily think that's meaning people aren't going out at all. I think it means that when people are going out, they're looking for better experiences and they're looking for more unique experiences. Whereas maybe, some of the trends might have been a regular trip to your sort of local and just go and neck a couple of pints of something pretty bog standard sort of a few times a week. I think now people's mindsets are a little bit more about, well, actually, if I'm only going to go out once a week, then I want to go somewhere where I can get some great quality drink and also have an interesting experience. Again, the thing we tried to create by partnering with some other local sort of artisan producers, it's called the Surrey Tasting Room. So we're based in Surrey, and we try to source about sort of 90% plus of our stock comes from other local Surrey artisans, kind of thing, both from a drink point of view and also from a food point of view. And again, that just gives the whole place a slightly different positioning and something that people can think, so yeah, I'm going to go out and spend a night and go and support some of my local producers. So
and it gets you to that spot where you're offering a full range of products, because consumers as a group want a wide range. So if you had to do that all on your own, that would be a massive undertaking. If you had to have, cocktails and different beers and other products. So this partnership piece is really, really unique in terms of you get to the right result, but you don't have to do it all yourself.
No, exactly. And like I say, our entire business has been built on partnerships. It obviously started from a partnership with a baker, and now we have a network of bakers that we source different breads from. So we've always very much had that partnership mindset in our business, and yeah, I think carrying it forward to other elements of our business was a natural progression.
Yeah. Well, maybe we'll get into a little bit more specifically what you do. I'll tell you, for what it's worth, where I grew up in Canada, we used to, me and my friends, we used the phrase that if we were going to go for a barley sandwich, that was code for we were going to go have a beer. And now if we put it in your context, you can maybe start telling us about this artesian bread you talked about. You're not just throwing it all in one big barrel and mixing it up. You're keeping it uniquely based on the type of bread ends up in a different brand. So maybe I see the poster behind, so maybe you could talk about and talk about the brand maybe and what you've developed and how that.
I think just to give you guys context, and obviously the guys that listen to your podcast be interested, we went through a lot of sort of mashing trials in the early days as to, even though we knew it was possible and we knew some other people were playing around with the idea, we kind of wanted to start from a blank piece of paper. And we went through a lot of mashing trials looking at sort of, how much bread can you put in? How much malt do you still need? How do you put the bread in? Do you put it, just throw it in as a loaf? Do you toast it first? All these different things we played around with. And long story short, where we netted out was the sort of the sweet spot for kind of maximizing and keeping your level of sort of fermentable sugars in a good level is about 25% bread versus 75% malt. So hopefully good for your listeners. We're not saying you get rid of malt completely, and that's I'm not a master brewer myself. So again, some of the chemistry is probably above my pay grade. But yeah, there's a sweet spot there in terms of the bread itself is pretty efficient at providing sugars, but we think it's probably about sort of 50-60% as efficient. And obviously there are enzymes and things in the malt that are key to the process. The 25% mark is sort of where you kind of get the best bang for your buck, for a better word. And then also logistically and practically, you go much beyond 25% and your mash starts to get a little bit more like porridge. So again, the malt and the grain plays a really important role in providing some structure to the mash kind of thing. So I think bottom line, there's still it's about 25% of your dry ingredients. So it's very much an important part of the mix. And that's where I get very frustrated. There's a few of us out there doing it at the moment, and even some of the interesting names. So there's a brewery you might have heard of that has a dog on the logo. That they for a while started putting bread into their lost lager for a time being, and their owner in an interview had kind of made some flippant comment of, oh yeah, we throw about 10% of bread in and it doesn't really make any difference. And I just found that really bizarre in that brewers are so particular about everything from waters to pH to malt quality to hop quality. If you're throwing in something that's 25% in your ingredients, why wouldn't you be as particular about that as you are about everything else? So again, where we come from and where we are very passionate is that we treat the bread as a really key ingredient, and the style and the flavor of that bread has to contribute towards the style and the flavor of the beer. So each of the beers is only made with one type of loaf. So yeah, the green one on my shoulder here is our sourdough pale ale, which, as the name suggests, is made with sourdough bread. And that way, what we do is we understand the flavors of the bread that go in, and then we try and build the recipe around that. So the malts that we choose complement that, the hops that we choose complement that to build the style. And again, the sweet spot that we want from the people that drink our beers is to understand our story and buy into our story and what we're trying to do to fight food waste. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's a beer. It needs to be a great tasting beer. So it still needs to taste like a great pale ale or a great lager or whatever. But again, what we want our drinkers to do is to understand the role that the bread plays. So with the sourdough, there's a really nice sort of dryness and astringency that comes from sourdough bread that we work with, and with our choice of hops, etc., kind of work with that flavor, so that when someone's drinking it, they're not getting a pint of bread, but they are getting a pint where they can understand the role that the bread has played.
Yeah, I think that's a great distinction to make, that you say, number one, the bread element is an ingredient, and you have to monitor that as you would with all your ingredients. But it also comes with the good backstory to it, that you are repurposing that, otherwise it would be waste. So you're kind of getting a double benefit from it, if I say it that way, that you're getting the ingredient piece, which is unique. I think I would describe to you before we hit record, like, you've got a very unique story as I see it, and it's a really good story. So I guess that reuse of the bread is something that I think consumers could really relate to.
Yeah, I know exactly.
Yeah. So we got a sourdough.
Yeah.
Ale.
Yeah, there's actually this one I've got handy. So this one we make with rye bread. So again, of all the beers, it's interesting what comes out of the bread. So when we're developing the recipes, it's interesting to see. So like I say, with the sourdough, there's a good dryness that comes from the bread. Our rye ruby ale, as you'd expect, is made with rye bread. And again, the rye bread we source from one of our bakers is a very traditional rye that has sort of caraway and it's a very pungent, very aromatic loaf. So again, that works really nicely with a ruby ale. And again, you get those sort of hints of caraway and stuff coming through in the beer. So it's again, it really shows up, and you sort of understand the kind of the role it plays, kind of thing.
And ABVs, what's the alcohol level in these beers, or the range?
So I think the pale ale's 4.2, the ruby's 5. Most of our beers at the moment, we're sort of keeping. We played around. We did a seasonal for a while. There was a rye coffee porter that we took rye bread, and then also took leftover coffee grounds from one of the bakers we work with from their coffee machines. So we took, again, the grounds from their coffee machines were just getting wasted. They couldn't give them away. So we took those and put those in the beer as well, and did a rye coffee porter. And we pushed that one up to 8%. And actually, it's one of our best rated beers. but it's sort of still quite a niche, and it's one of those ones that we keep thinking, oh, we should bring that back, kind of thing. But generally, again, I think as a brewery, I mean, the brewery scene in the UK, I think is it has changed a lot probably over the last sort of 5 years. But one of the challenges I think with our industry is sometimes we can get so caught up in craft beer and doing weird and wacky things that we can sometimes lose sight of the fact that you want your beers to be accessible and easy to drink for a lot of people, kind of thing.
Yeah, and I guess if I'm right, seasonal would be a little bit challenging in terms of, I presume that the bakers are making bread every day, like 12 months a year. I guess you could develop a seasonal using the same bread streams, but I
Yeah,
guess
no,
you
exactly.
want something consistent throughout the year because the bread's there consistently throughout the year. So I guess
Yeah,
that
no,
to
exactly.
keep it simple, you just get
Yeah,
some brands that are good year
no,
round.
exactly. But all our ABVs tend to be in that sort of 4 to 5 range. Again, we want them to be accessible. I kind of want people to find our brand, whether they're a beer nerd or not, kind of thing. As many of our customers hopefully buy into our purpose and what we're trying to do from an environmental point of view as they do to the taste of our beers.
Yeah, well, it's great. Well, you've got a tasting room in conjunction with all these other partners, so I think people could be invited to go out and explore that themselves. As I said to you, I'm coming across to look at some barley fields, so I'll make a stop
Absolutely,
and
we'd love
try
to.
some of that. Maybe to finish up, Morgan, pursuing the Perfect Pint podcast would say, in your mind, if you were going to pursue and try to enjoy the perfect pint, what would that look like from your perspective? Which one of your beers or what occasion would they all fit together nicely? And you could say, geez, that was a perfect pint.
I think, well, ironically, that the sun's out and it's blue skies here in the UK at the moment. But I think my perfect pint always revolves around a typical British day, really. So usually, rainy, cold, in a quaint pub. So I think the perfect pint is as much about the perfect location as it is the perfect pint. But I think nothing can beat that sort of sitting in a pub in front of a roaring fire on a cold, wet, miserable day with I think it's something of the style of our rye ruby ale. So something that's on cask, something that's been really well kept and is beautifully fresh on cask. I'm a sucker for a good old pint of Harvey's in the UK is sort of a bit of a benchmark for kind of me. But yeah, there's that beautifully creamy, smooth cask ale in a pub in front of a fire with people you love and eating some nice food. I think that's to me the perfect pint.
Yeah, sounds pretty good. Well, maybe if we get together when I do my little tour through the UK, we'll maybe try to find
Exactly. Yeah. Well,
do a
I'm
little
sure Normal
travel up.
will return by then, so that's
Yeah,
fine.
yeah, for sure. Well, thanks again for everything. Appreciate it. Good to catch up
No worries. That's great. Good to meet
with
you.
us. Cheers. Okay.
I mean, I've had the pleasure of tasting some of Morgan's beers, and genuinely they are absolutely delicious. And I think what he's done around linking, different breads to different beer styles is really clever and does what it says on the tin. Crumbs, beer made from waste to bread. It's a very easy story to tell.
Yeah, and as you said, I call it kind of the bread pairing. You've got a rye bread or whichever. So you have some a great concept. I guess maybe start with that, Danielle. Like a great concept. First of all, I had no idea how much bread was wasted. I'm not just saying in the UK because I'm sure it's pretty common everywhere in the world, but it's a staggering amount of bread every day that doesn't actually get consumed and goes into the waste channel. So really innovative idea to grab that and then do some interesting bread pairings with it and I haven't tried one. It'd be on my to-do list, but in the pursuit of the perfect pint. But yeah, I just thought it was a great story to share with people because it is one of the few I've heard in that space.
And I think it's also, we've been talking a lot around, storytelling and bringing the consumer closer to the product. And I think for consumers with an interest in sustainability, that whole story of bringing people into the category using a waste product also then introduces them to a range of really delicious beers. So there's other ways of bringing people into beer.
Yeah. And I guess in a way, when we talk about the identity crisis for malt, right? So I guess now you start putting a little more emphasis on the ingredients. So what's going into the beer? So this bread example is right in your face because you say, oh, well, I'm having the rye bread based beer. So I guess maybe if in terms of getting consumers a little more aware and knowing what's in the product is a good story, and maybe it'll help on that journey to explain there's still malt in those beers, so that's a good thing. And maybe just a little more consumers I think are genuinely interested in what goes into their beers, and this is just really kind of in your face kind of example of even using waste bread. So I guess I think it can only help in that sense.
Absolutely. And where are we heading to next week, Brent?
Well, we've got some global travels ahead. So we're going to do the U.S. next week. And after that, we're going to travel between back to the U.K. and I think we've also got Australia on the map. So we're bouncing around, but we've got the global pursuit of the perfect pint continues.
See you next week.
All the best. Cheers.
Cheers.